Hey guys, we are back updating the power rankings for the Traitors US Season 2 following Week 8, also known as Episode 10. And this was obviously a pretty eventful episode, multiple people going home, and it's obviously the penultimate episode of the season, to where obviously we are now heading into the finale coming this Thursday night. And obviously, I feel like it's pretty clear how this game is going to end up, though we'll be talking about more in a moment. But there are 9 people to talk about, and let's not waste any more time. Let's get right into the video. So starting off at number 9, we have the first boot from this episode, and here we have Peter. And obviously, Peter was voted out here by MJ, which obviously from an in-game standpoint makes sense considering their connection. Even though last week I felt like there was a chance that MJ could have followed through with this, they'll be talking about that more with MJ soon enough. But obviously Peter, like even if he had survived this round table, I feel like he probably wasn't that long for the game considering just how massive of a target that he had on his back. But obviously, if we are talking about his game, he was obviously a pretty big leader throughout a lot of it, being the leader of this alliance that was determined to get out a lot of the traitors. And while he was successful in taking out people like Dan and Parvati, I do feel like he also ostracized certain people within the house, namely people outside of his alliance, to where it just became inevitable over time that people would want to target him. And obviously he was eventually taken out there. So I do fault him to that end. But again, he was still a decent detective. He's definitely one of the better leader figures that we have seen in the Traitors US up to this point. But obviously he is now out of the game, which is why he's here at number 9. Now moving on to number 8, we have the next boot on the board, and here we have John Burkow. And obviously John was sniped out here as a way of weakening the opposition even further to advance the Bravo girls like alliance throughout the game. And obviously John was one of the bigger proponents in taking out Fedra, so obviously it made sense why he would be taken out here. And again, I feel like from a game standpoint, he was definitely pretty well liked within the house. He was sort of seen as the faithful of the faithfuls, which obviously put him in a pretty solid spot. And he was part of that solid group for a lot of his run. So again, I do feel like he did better than what I was expecting from him coming into it. But obviously he is now out of the game as well, which is why he is here at number 8. Now moving on to number 7, we have the final boot from this episode, and here we have Fedra, which with this boot means that all of the original traitors are now out of the game. And as I said in last week's video, I feel like it didn't really matter as much whether Peter or Fedra were taken out at that first round table, as I feel like either way, both of them were pretty screwed in the game. And obviously we saw Fedra continue to be targeted down the road. And while I don't fault her necessarily for wanting to take out John as a way of ensuring that the Bravo girls have their numbers moving forward, I feel like she also did pretty terribly at defending herself, to where she never really threw out an alternative target. And obviously she pretty much gives up at the round table, where she doesn't even try to fight back against the accusations, to where even her own alliance turns on her by the end of it. And I do find it a little interesting that the show doesn't even try to make this more suspenseful, as they made the roundtable itself pretty short, and they made her exit here pretty unceremonious, which I do find interesting there. So obviously Phaedra is now out of the game, and I know some people online have said that Dan is responsible for ruining her game, that she was playing this great game up until Dan called her out at his roundtable. But I do feel like Phaedra, for the most part, played pretty passively, where even at the point where the other traders were in the game and she was letting people like Dan take over, I do feel like she was playing a bit too passively there. And even afterwards, I feel like the way that she responds to being accused isn't ideal either. So again, while I understand people say that she was targeted due to Dan, I feel like she also made plenty of mistakes in her own right that caused her target to grow as well. So again, I am pretty conflicted about her game as a whole, but obviously she is now out of the game, which is why she's here at number 7. And with that, there are 6 people left in the game to talk about, and as usual, I'll be ranking them based on how likely they are to win the game based on their edit and current game position. But number 6, the person I believe is the least likely to win from this point on, is Kate. And again, I feel like a lot of this stems from me believing that a faithful will win this season, but I do not think Kate is winning here. I feel like even with her edit not being as terrible as it could be, where obviously she has called out Phaedra for her mistakes for a lot of the game, I still feel like she'll be exposed by the end of it. I feel like the edit is clearly setting up a faithful to win the game by the end of it, which obviously will leave Kate on the outside looking in. You also have the setup to her wanting to target Sandra, which again, could be successful, but even then, I feel like it'll just play into the other faithful's hands. And in general, while I could see her getting to the final four, I feel like at that point, she'll probably be sniped out of the game by the faithfuls choosing to continue. So again, I feel pretty unconfident in Kate winning the game from this point on, which is why she's here at number 6. Now moving on to number 5, and obviously from this point on, the 5 people left are the faithfuls in the game. It's just a matter of ordering them. But number 5, I did decide to go with Sandra. And Sandra's edit up to this point has been pretty weird. Where even this episode, we obviously saw Kate wanting to put a bigger target on Sandra's back. And while she could be spared from the murder as a result, I feel like it'll just set up Sandra being banished at these next couple of rounds. And even beyond that, you have her getting some weird content here, like her talking at breakfast about how she's almost there, and that her strategy up to that point has been trying to befriend everyone, which to me feels like she's being set up to be sniped out right before the end. So in a lot of ways, I feel like Sandra seems primed to be taken out before the end here, which is why she's here at number 5. Now moving on to number 4, and I'm sure some people will feel like this person is too high, but number 4, I did decide to go with MJ. And MJ feels like she could be murdered here. I feel like for the most part, she hasn't really been propped up much in the edit. I feel like the fact that she voted out Peter after getting the setup in the last episode to her potentially flipping on Fedra is a pretty bad look there. But again, I feel like MJ is someone who's definitely been dunked on in the edit, and she doesn't seem like the best detective in the world either. So I feel like those are pretty big knocks to her game. But at the same time, I feel like compared to the other people we already talked about, I feel like she is a bit less set up for a downfall, even though I could still see her being murdered as a way of painting a target on Sandra's back down the road. And if she were to get to the end, I could also see her choosing to continue the game to try to keep Kate safe. So again, I'm not feeling that great about MJ either, which is why she's here at number 4. Now moving on to number 3, and obviously this was a pretty notable character in this last episode, and here we have Sheree. And Sheree's edit here was mostly her getting set up to her flipping on Fedra by the end of it, where she's talked about how close her and Fedra have been for a lot of the season, only for her to slowly come around to seeing Fedra as being a traitor, and obviously it culminates in her flipping on Fedra by the time of the roundtable. So again, I feel like that's pretty noteworthy there. Now beyond that, I do think she's a bit more secure in the game compared to MJ, where I feel like her edit has been a bit more in line with people who get towards the end of the game. I feel like MJ is someone who could easily be scapegoated and murdered as a result. I feel like Sheree is someone who people aren't really looking at this point, and she could just be dragged to the end there. So I do feel a bit more confident Sheree getting to the end of the game and possibly winning if they're able to take out the traitor at that point, which is why she's here at number 3. Now moving on to number 2, it is the same top 2 as last week, and it is the same order as last week. But number 2, we do have Trishelle. And the main reason I have Trishelle this low is I do feel like she's a bit more likely to be murdered towards the end compared to CT, or even Sheree for that matter. I could very well see Trishelle being murdered at this next murdering session. But at the same time, I feel like she's been set up as more the main character of the season compared to Sheree, to where if her and CT get to the end together, I feel like it's pretty likely that they'll win by the end. But it's the fact that she could be murdered in these next couple of rounds that kind of leaves her behind at number 2. And now, at number 1, the person I believe is the most likely to win the Traitors US Season 2 going into the finale is CT. And again, I feel like this was a mostly solid episode for CT here, where he was one of the people to suspect Fedra being a traitor. And while he wasn't as active as Trishelle in convincing a lot of the Bravo girls to flip on Fedra, I do still feel like CT is being propped up here to a degree. And I feel like he's less likely to be murdered compared to Trishelle and sort of skate his way to the end, to where he probably has one of the smallest targets on his back at this point in the game, but is still someone who's been propped up as a decent detective and someone who could sniff out a traitor down the road. So I feel like those things were pretty good on his end, which is why I feel like he is probably very likely to get to the end and win. So because of that, I do have him here at number 1. And there we go. That will do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe. Really helps with the channel. Now, after the season ends, I'll be doing a player ranking for the season, so you can look forward to that. And I'm covering a whole bunch of shows at this point, so you can expect coverage of those shows. I'm on Patreon now, so if you want to consider supporting the channel, you can do so by clicking the link in the description. And you can also join the Discord server by also clicking the link in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way. But for now, that is the video. See ya.